All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Today we have Robert Bolton visiting us, artist and foresight strategist from later, or from later. And Robert is a friend from Toronto, and he wrote this really good article. Someone in the chat just said it was epic. The NPC, an unplayable character for unnarratable times, an exploration of a nebulous and evolving archetype. And so it traces the NPC meme from something that was a stigmatized meme, criticizing certain aspects of the culture war, to something that became a desirable thing to become. And I really enjoyed this piece from Robert because it provided a unique kind of perspective on this evolving meme. So, how today's going to work? I'm going to tag in Robert in a moment, and he's going to share some slides, I believe, and present on the NPC for about 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll pivot to Q&A. So if you have questions anytime, pop them in the chat, and then when it gets to the Q&A portion, I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question to Robert. And if we have time near the end, we might have a more open freestyle dialogue. With that being said, Robert, welcome to the store, and I'm going to take you in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Peter. As I get this set up with screen sharing, should work. How's that? Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool to see a really neat, diverse mix of friends and stuff in here. Before I start, I just wanted to, uh, as I dig into this NPC meme journey, acknowledge my partner Savannah, who put up with me talking about NPCs for months, and also contributed and bounced ideas around with me a lot, as well as two of the artists who are featured prominently in the article are here now, I think Jesse and Kadra. So yeah, thank you to both of you for generously allowing your work to be featured. And after that, there's so many other people that I spoke to about this topic, and some of you are all here and know who you are. So thank you all as well. Thanks for coming. So the NPC meme, I'm going to read a little bit about some of the writing, read some of the writing, as well as some new writing, along with selections from the essay that Peter mentioned, which was in Newest Magazine, where I am part of the editorial team. The theme of the issue was posturing, and that was a theme that I had pushed for a little bit because the question of how artists posture was compelling to me. I think largely because it was upsetting to some people to even talk about and to acknowledge the way that that happens. So I just found that the problem of posturing is a constant thing in the relationship between artists and institutions, and just part of the life of being a person or being an artist. And it seemed like the only place that this was getting addressed in a really creative way was on like meme pages on Instagram. And I wanted to know, why is that? Why is this not something that more people are talking about in their work? Um, I've been interested also in the NPC meme, and it was a kind of cultural object that I had intended to write about for years and never quite gotten to it. And it had kind of had different moments of relevance along the way. So the NPC meme kind of took me for a long ride here, to the point that I became convinced that it's one of the important symbols and archetypes and rituals of our time. And I also ended up writing about dance, which I hadn't expected to do. And it sort of resulted in some suggestions toward a new set of poetic techniques for artists operating in the age of metacrisis and algorithmic culture. I love words, I love memes and slang, and I'm fascinated by watching how their connotations shift. And every once in a while, I need to take on some kind of epic sense making project like this one, just to I feel like I have a handle on things. This work is still unresolved in many ways. I want it to be generative, so I'm interested in whatever comes up for everybody. And if you'll share back, I would love that as well. For me, uh, as an outsider to the world of gaming and someone who's not really extremely online, I was really fascinated with the idea of the NPC. I learned about it as a diss, and as a diss, I liked it aesthetically. Insofar as insults can be aesthetic, NPC was just a beautiful diss. 3 letters, you dismiss your detractors the way an athlete dismisses sideline hecklers. Until you enter the arena, your opinion counts for nothing. You're a non-player. The NPC conceit conjured a bizarre theory of everything, drawing on occult mysticism, pop psychology, and the simulation hypothesis. To summarize it, given the scarcity of souls in this game, some of you are basically furniture. NPCs were said to have no inner voice. To be called one was to be called not subhuman, but humanoid. It was mean and dismissive and very funny. And then I started seeing that people were self-identifying as NPCs. They had become something desirable in a lot of different ways that I talk about within this essay. And it mainstreamed a lot at various moments. It became a badge that people were wearing, literally wearing the letters NPC on hoodies. And that actually made sense to me at first, because we at least once in a while know that it's nice to be relieved of our main character energy. Nobody wants to be the main character 100% of the time. So resigning to NPC status becoming desirable made sense. And there were other cultural critics who talked about it as emancipatory, or even like a sort of act of protest because of the ways that NPCs in video games don't seem to really do their work. But by calling yourself an NPC, you're giving yourself the gift of temporary relief from the burden of protagonism, a chance to simply be and observe without the weight of narrative responsibility. The term became so versatile that you could identify yourself as an NPC at a party and it would give self-effacing charm. This insult that implied absence of internality became a signal of self-awareness, and it was an endearing move to just acknowledge your role within a particular social dynamic by saying, I'm an NPC. And it also started to feel like something even bigger than that culturally. Something was happening. My friend Rada, who's a foresight strategist, pointed out on a YouTube show broadcast from later that we do, that people were acting like NPCs in public, dancing like NPCs on TikTok, and there was this ritual reenactment happening. So the NPC had transcended its pejorative function as the beautiful diss and become the object of ritual embodiment. In its many manifestations, the NPC is an archetype of an era that aspires only to be mid, a people that wish to blend in, a culture that celebrates not the hero nor the villain, but the chorus. In these viral clips, like going to Walmart as an NPC, you see real people, dancers, emulating the gestures and gaits and postures and facial expressions of non-player characters from games like Grand Theft Auto and The Sims and Call of Duty. These videos are mesmerizing, and I wanted to treat them seriously, so I started writing about them like a dance critic would. The NPC hovers weightlessly in a T-model preparatory pose before jerking into a grammar of ungainly hand waves, sudden crouches, and exaggerated grand jetés. Their transitions are abrupt, sweeping turns on impossibly sharp pivots. The dancer deforms, snapping from one orientation to another. They strut, arms swinging with a nothing-to-lose gait like a brute looking for a fight. The dance of the NPC portrays a mythology for the meaning crisis. What its choreography lacks in purpose and direction is also what makes it so resonant. The NPC keeps going, detached from the chaos surrounding them. Continuous rhythmic strides are unthwarted even by the clipping of physical obstacles. For a coda, the NPC walks endlessly into a wall, their countenance unchanging, staring in oblivion. Marching in place, they present a familiar absurdity, exertion with inertia, effort without the possibility of achievement. Their gestures are the somatic expression of brain fog, calibrated to the tone of that dull hum people report. This is a dance about persevering through stagnation, yearning for renewal. The NPC seeks what anyone seeks when they're stuck, a reset. Excuse me while I fill some water up. Inevitably, the NPC archetype arises in response to the sustained anxiety of existing in Metacrisis, a theory of everything people worry about. The underlying dynamics of the Metacrisis are a Jeremiad list of global existential challenges. Prolonged pandemics, climate risks, global conflict, war and genocide, economic precarity, and resource scarcity. These are compounded by crises of individual meaning, epidemic loneliness and despair, all of which are further clouded by an epistemic crisis so normalized it's hardly talked about even anymore. Information overload, eroded trust in science and journalism, meme warfare, misinformation and engineered persuasion, psyops and cyber attacks against citizens, routine identity fraud attempts via text message every day. If anxiety is fear without a clear and addressable threat, fight or flight, but there's no one to fight and nowhere to fly away to, the metacrisis conditions a state of sustained anxiety. The cultural embrace of the NPC and its ritualized movements amounts to a collective physiological sigh, resignation to the chaos of forces interacting and exacerbating one another. Our sense-making faculties are not degraded. They're savvy as ever, but exhausted, completely depleted by this disorienting Venn diagram of warring microcosms. So I wanted to get really deep into understanding what the NPC was from all different disciplinary viewpoints. And again, I was an outsider when I started digging into how 3D side characters are actually made. What does it actually take to create them? This is where I spoke to Savannah, as well as the artists I mentioned, Kedra Mensa and Lil Lonely, who were using NPC imagery in their work. And you can see it in the article, which I'll share the link. And they were actually modeling 3D characters. And I learned a little bit about how difficult it is to make a 3D character move like a real human. And again, I got really taken by the language that's used and the metaphors that are kind of imposed in the technology. When you model a 3D character, its body is represented by what's called a mesh, which is just an empty bag sculpted to the character's geometric form, its body, but it's just the outer surface without any mass or physiology. It doesn't know how to move, and it's not subject to the laws of physics. The 3D character is created in a vacuum without physical forces like gravity or friction or air resistance. The motion of the character's body has to be governed by its own internally consistent set of rules. This kind of inside-out physics is known as kinematics. And kinematics is a math that describes position, velocity, acceleration, without considering the underlying forces that cause their motion. Developers can approximate human movement by putting the mesh, the character's body, on a rig. The rig is like the character's skeleton. Before the character can move, you have to bind the mesh to the rig and assign the different vertices to specific bones and joints in a hierarchical order. So the character's body parts connect and rotate in a cascade of motion. In a subsequent stage called weight painting, you can assign how much influence each bone should have over the movement of adjacent surfaces of the mesh. You're essentially painting the math onto the body of the character in this process. And it looks like a heat map where the colors indicate how loyal the selected region of the body will be to the selected bone, making the character's movements look natural while also giving the character its own idiosyncratic feel and affect is a long and laborious process, I learned. The results look strange because they are. You have this internally coherent body of physics that, while it appears to hold itself in relation to a universe, is unmoved by external forces. So when dancers on TikTok imitate NPCs, They're enacting how their bodies would move if they were placed on a rig. And for me, this was like a key to understanding the desirability of the NPC role play. I started to see that this NPC idea and the appeal of it was a fantasy that you might move through the world without feeling exhausted by its hefty pressures, without feeling exhausted by gravity, by the physics, by the chaotic metacrisis that I described. That's all around you. Just as it's difficult to transpose natural movements of humans into video games, it's also difficult to copy NPC mannerisms over to our physical world as a dancer. Bringing this logic out of the virtual and into the real through dance is a very virtuosic thing. Manipulating your body as though you're within the kinetic limits of a computer graphic takes a lot of strength and poise. So through the lexicon of visual sleights, the NPC dancers are showing us what it might be like to be kinematic, to be loyal only to your own bones, to be unaffected by outside information. And they appear to levitate, they glitch, distorted and disjointed. They're precise, stable and consistent. They're as if tethered to a rig. As a style of dance, it may lack delicate finesse, but it boasts conclusive control. The human body, as with the project of technology, has something to prove to the world. It can manipulate physics to do what it wants. Both technology and dance are media for understanding, testing, and exploiting the fundamental laws of nature. NPC dancing, it turns out, belongs to a lineage of popular dance moves inspired by technology and industry. As the McLuhanian aphorism goes, we become what we behold. And we've done the robot, the locomotion, the moonwalk, which commemorates the space race, voguing, which has the serial striking of static angular poses like a camera flash at a photo shoot, popping and boogaloo, which draw on movements from classic cartoon animation. Each of these dances literalizes and subverts its own technocultural fantasy. To be powerful and efficient, to be glamorous and immortal, to be frivolous and fantastical, to do the impossible, to be liberated of earthly constraints. The NPC performs a fantasy of ordinariness and anonymity in its dance. The French ballet performs a fantasy of what it might be like to be courtly. In its formative years, King Louis XIV himself was a ballet dancer, established standards of techniques and performance that reflected the poise and self-control valued within the royal court. If ballet adopted a style and etiquette that reflected the king's postures back to the king for the king's pleasure, choreographing a coherent relationship of power and worship, then NPC dancing for TikTok is about presenting the gestures of digital media back to the computer in ways that make our subservience to machines more legible to them, the machines. The 3D animator's stylus impresses itself all over Gen Z's signature dance moves. Though some of them have real-life origins, moves like the floss got popular by way of the game Fortnite, and they made their way onto TikTok as part of wider trends or challenges. And over time, the moves evolved into longer choreographies and were sometimes reincorporated back into the game. Eventually, it starts to look like a reciprocal cultural exchange is happening directly between video games and social media. Humans are relegated to intermediary status, oracular bodies and hands, needed only for a brief phase of manual transmission. And Joshua Citarella put this very nicely on an episode of New Models podcast. He says, if you look at TikTok, your body is literally animated by the algorithm. It tells you how to move yourself, and you end up dancing for this abstract formulation of capital and algorithmic recommendation. That abstract formulation is also what his colleagues Lil Internet and Carly Busta call platform physics. And platform physics, I know many will be familiar with it here. It's a wonderfully useful term and kind of also an extension of McLuhan. It just refers to the hard-coded workings of platforms. So that's their inherent user interfaces, mechanics, affordances, algorithms, incentives, all those things that determine what kind of content is made and how it gets circulated through the network. Different kinds of physics produce not just different kinds of content, unique meme templates shaped to fit the platform's Overton window. The platform physics also produce different kinds of audiences and criticism, and most obviously, different kinds of authors and different kinds of postures. Usually when it's said that someone is posturing, this is a claim that they're being intentionally misleading or adopting a stance in order to gain clout or acceptance. They're an imposter. But the way I've been approaching it from the beginning with this writing was without these venomous connotations, because I don't think they're fair or necessary. In its figurative sense, the posture is just to take a state of being or an attitude in relation to circumstances. So it's almost unfair to say someone is posturing when this is a dynamic that is happening between a body and a world. People don't just posture. Postures unfold in a situation that is unfolding, conditioned by the conditions of metacrisis, set into motion by the platform physics. The contemporary artist's operating environment is a multi-platform entanglement of forces and lures, systems on systems on systems, a complex of felt pressures and perceived bait. There are equal and opposite pulls to be academic and mediagenic. There are rewards for posing with your art, prizes for seeming successful, bonus points for dancing for the algorithm. There are cringe cycles. There are trends and trend resistance, threats of obsolescence, pressures to have the correct stance on the new thing, allegations of performative allyship and virtue signaling, and perversely pressures to be edgy and irreverent, encouragement to work with the garage door open, document the process, and copy left, only to be exploited by the mood board industrial complex. That is, I believe, another Cinderella coinage. The artist is left strung to some downwardly mobile Rube Goldberg mechanism, grasping for crumbs while struggling to find tensegrity. And it's these forces what I sort of see in how I imagine the NPC posture being shaped and how we end up with this image. The artist here strung up to this mobile Rube Goldberg mechanism, grasping for crumbs, struggling to find tensegrity. And it shows in some of the postures commonly struck by artists: demure, sardonic, scatterbrain, radical, moral, cool, aloof, erudite bibliophile, glamorous, struggling, shamanic, QAnonic, shadow band, naive, cyborg, edgelord, wholesome, sexy, hypermasculine, divine feminine, feminist, not racist. It's not an exhaustive list here. Depending on who you talk to, the P in NPC stands for player or playable interchangeably. The latter allows you for a flip of emphasis, a double entendre, including the slang definition of play, as in stop playing, I'm not the one to be played with, or you played yourself. Calling yourself an NPC is also a type of negative identity formation. What that means is it doesn't say who you are, it just says who you're not. Like a figure ground relationship, you articulate yourself by defining the negative space around you and abstracting yourself from it. As an NPC, you are not player one, not any player in this game, not the main character, not a good guy nor a bad guy, though your sense of self is oppositional. The NPC is defined against playability. They're indifferent and invulnerable to the narrative arc. The NPC, rather than the villain or the anti-hero, is the true opposite of protagonism. Rather than just the conformist reactionary programmed to retort predictably when triggered, as the meme would show, the NPC takes a stance of non-playability, a mindset, a firm attitudinal relation to the circumstances, a kinematic posture. The NPC is internally charged, unswayable, loyal only to their own rigging, a kinematic self moving through the world, motivated by their own internal math. So what does this mean for us? If its mesh is a vessel, the NPC archetype is a wastebasket to store our collective anxieties about an era marked by capitalistic pressures, digital alienation, climate damage, political division, obsessive identity formation. And it makes sense for the situation. The mood is not of disillusioned resignation, it's more of a detached resistance. The NPC reclaims agency from within its glaring limitations while rejecting the absurd expectations of narrative coherence. The symbolic application and ritual reenactment of the NPC archetype announces itself as mythology for the metacrisis, an awakening from the dull, languishing, deep-fried brain fog with new postures, new gestures of machine vitality, and new aesthetic techniques. After listening to Vultures, Kanye West and Ty Dolla $ign's studio album, Lil Internet, on a podcast monologue, described its vibe as mindless NPC. He qualified that he did not mean that in a disparaging way. Instead, he says it is spectacularly mindless. He calls Ye the GOAT NPC, appearing faceless on the album cover. This is Kanye West, the artist who also wrote Everything I'm Not Made Me Everything I Am, articulating himself in opposition to societal expectations and, again, negative identity formation. There is something Kanyeic in the notion of a kinematic self, defined by non-playability, can't tell me nothing, yet all the while obsessed with audience approval. The NPC railing against algorithmic determinism while embracing a form of performative self-editing. Though Kanye interfaces with the publicity machine as a willing participant, he protests by hacking it, buying a 30-second Super Bowl ad to broadcast a video note shot on his smartphone selfie camera. How he composes his media ecosystem is entirely a matter of leverage, exploiting the platform physics to his advantage. Following this pattern, we might speculate on a responsive art that leverages soft infrastructure and online platforms, the way skaters did drainage ditches and public plazas. Lil Internet describes vultures as an endless stream of idiosyncratic memes over idiosyncratic collages of samples, an album empty of meaning but full of affect and mimetics that hints towards a particular possibility of art in the AI age, massively strange attentional objects that are at once mid, mass, and singularly subjective, assembled out of countless embeddings and samples and interpolations and intuitions. The phrasing spectacularly mindless feels historically appropriate, like it's circling in on something that could satisfy the social moment for the arts. The suggestion is an art that feeds on the fringes of collective awareness, retrieving shards of hyperfragmented culture, rescuing echoes from chambers, salvaging old hard drives, tapped into signals from outside and within. It treats the algorithmic as aleatoric, chance-based, giving prompts and also receiving them as oblique strategies or spiritual guidance. It voids definitive interpretation, yet resonates at the monumental scale of religious fervor. Though it produces pieces, its standard unit of appraisal is the God form attentional object, composable, conflicting, responsive, yet whole and singular in its artistic vision. The centaur auteur sculpts itself, steering its aggregate egregore into view. Or in the words of Lil Internet, AI plunderphonics meets meme magic, piloted by heretical influencers. While playable characters respond to command, the NPC responds to stimuli. The NPC respawns on every platform, with new techniques, adaptive or deceptive, unbound from the tyranny of choice and constrained game environments. The NPC apprehends the illusion of agency forged inside systems of structured rules and incentives. The NPC recognizes their actions are somewhat random, somewhat determined, dances to the stimuli, responding to peers, protocols, audiences, and algorithms, isn't caught up in quests or achievements, doesn't keep score or collect credit card points. The NPC knows they're insufficient, abhors the self-optimizing individual, rejects linearity, resists biography, abstains hope, could conceivably do anything but bides their time. The NPC is directionless, expects no clear or singular goal, spreads thin, stretched every which way by conflicting objectives. The NPC does not understand the assignment, takes on obscure and useless projects, shakes path dependencies, takes money from anyone, bends beholden to no one, never self-censors, encrypts intentions, arbitrages attention, delves into dark forests, deals in taboos and talks about posturing, knows all the dirty tricks, exploits platform physics, which is just the same as pandering, does psyops, astroturfs Mandela effects, sculpts themselves, rigs themselves, runs themselves, lets themselves out in the wild's worlds. The NPC specifies their own implementation details, loops, varies, conditions their own behavior with in-game logic, satisfies if statements, or else, executes the same set of instructions repeatedly until conditions are met, samples themselves, repeats themselves, samples themselves, repeats themselves. The NPC doesn't die, they unalive and respawn chubby in Miami, confounds gate recognition, makes their work illegible to mids and machines, throws off the scent, does psyops, makes itself illegible to Art Basel Miami, YouTube's a dazzle camel machine vision counter surveillance makeup tutorial, becomes unnarratable, colludes in secret telepathy, inserts symbols, drops shibboleths, makes up words, overuses them, makes themselves obsolete, makes the world obsolete, decomposes, recomposes, can't be deplatformed, is platformless, transcends legacy, leaves traces, keeps going, staying unresolved, the unplayable character for unnarratable times. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. Let's give him a round of applause. Excellent presentation. Quite enjoyed it. And so we're going to pivot to the Q&A portion now. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself, ask your question to Robert. We won't go in any particular order.
Well,
And yeah, we're here for 90 minutes in total. But we'll see how it goes. So I'll warm you up with a few questions.
okay.
I like this notion of kind of like non-playable and then like unplayable, which was the title of your essay. And then the
Mm,
non-playable aspect was like the original kind of NPC diss, what Jordan Hall called simulated thinking. You're not actually thinking, you're just boring like other people's thoughts. Do you think there's signal to the original this? Like there's actually people who engage in simulated thinking. So like there's like a taxonomy of NPCs that are emerging, like ones that actually don't think and ones that are using it as sort of like an act of rebellion.
yeah, it's pretty fluid for me, and I guess aside from it being a beautiful diss, I think it's also like useful for your own mindfulness and self-awareness to kind of notice the different things that we do that are NPC-ish. I guess where I'm going with it now is how to play with that. Like, what are these if-then statements that you can use that actually kind of, rather than just being like, thanks, have a nice day, or I'm just outraged because I'm supposed to be, do something different. And the one that's like a tweet draft for me that I've come up with is whatever you think about Elon Musk, I'll argue the opposite. And sometimes I feel like there are these like counter forces you can take. But to me, whatever is not what the person across from me is telling me about that particular person is the more interesting take. So I don't know. That's just like an example of it. But I guess that's different from your question. I don't think taxonomizing it, like I think all of those things can coexist. Yes. I
Mhm.
guess if that's the simple answer. Yeah. Is that where you were going?
Yeah. Yeah. And then my other question is you mentioned like the main character syndrome or the main character kind of archetype contrasting it to the NPC in the piece. And you also mentioned the live player um, kind of concept, which I originally heard from Samuel Berger. So I'm curious, how do you hold those two, the main character live player with the NPC? Like how do you
Uh,
contrast?
yeah. Do you want to try give the distinction between the live player main character, or give some background on that first?
Yeah. So the way that Samuel Berger defined live player is basically a person or a group of people who can create something new, where like he contrasts that to like a dead player, that a dead player can only create something that's already in existence. So that's my understanding of where the term came from. And I think who's that guy that K-Hole, he did the original thing on live player, or he did another spin on it, which I think it had a similar notion, just being able to create something new. Where my understanding of the main character, you probably know more than I do, is just like kind of like you're the protagonist of your online self, and there's like a sense of narcissism associated with it. Um, so I saw
Yeah.
what's used in your piece. So I'm just curious how you hold it together with the NPC.
For the main character thing, I just feel like it's because of maybe the way that our brains work. It's just like this danger of stories, and it is hard to not imagine yourself as the main character constantly. And it actually takes some work, to do that. And also just that these ideas are the ideas of stories with particular goals and um, yeah, are limited, and that you can be more like that. There's actually some virtue or some value in being more directionless than a main character tends to be because they have a little more linear plot progression. Um, yeah, I mean, a whole part of this NPC thing again is this fantasy, and so it's worth remembering that too, that like I'm not all about everyone being an NPC. I think it is a fantasy that you can evade fluctuations of good and ill fortune. That's not how the world is. Yeah, and it would be foolish to act as though you're completely unfazed by anything that happens in the world.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to pivot to questions in the chat, and feel free to turn on your camera. You don't have to, but bring some light to the stoa, and so Robert and I are not the only people in the room. So yeah, we'll go with Akil, and apologies in advance if I'm mispronouncing names, but you had the first question about NPC and the Metacrisis. And feel free to have one follow-up question as well. So I'll
Yeah,
take you.
thanks, Peter. And thanks, Robert, for such a wonderful piece and this great talk. So as my question in the chat goes, there are clearly people who are aware of this meta crisis and are taking it head on, and versus the NPCs that you're talking about. And like Peter mentioned, there is a range of them, maybe some who are actually not thinking and some who are actually dropping out in an act of rebellion, like you're saying. But either of those are not very useful responses, because like the meta crisis becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, if people are, even if people are rebelling in these manners. So the question is like, in your experience, have you come across any way in which you can actually make people aware of this, any way which gives them more agency and a desire to actually change things, versus saying that, shit is fucked, and I'm just going to live in my little corner of the world and do things whichever way, and ride things out till the end of my days?
I mean, where I'm trying to go with it is that instead of just resigning to, okay, we're all just NPCs and these platform physics and this meta crisis that we exist, that there should be some excitement in the vitality of machines, and that in fact we as humans, as artists, have always gotten excited about machine vitality, we can call it, and and that's to me what the whole sort of manifesto part of the writing or the presentation today is about. Is like not just simply resigning and letting that be a self-fulfilling prophecy, but being something that is like there are just infinite ways to respond to this and infinitely interesting ways to respond to it, and possibilities for new forms of art, new forms of activism, new ways of being, like especially that new ways of just existing, other than what we come to expect. And it's like I don't mean to be like too prescriptive about it. This whole piece is really me just working through and my own like deep fried brain fog that a lot of others that I would talk to felt earlier this year as well, you know.
Got it. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the angle that you took was very interesting, that even while like there's NPC as an act of silent rebellion is a very unique way of responding. So yeah, you're right. One can reclaim agency in multiple ways.
Yeah, but it's this kinematism idea that I'm like, it's actually very not what people traditionally think of as NPC, this idea of becoming kinematic, which is, yeah, again, a fantasy, the idea that you would be like completely from within, loyal only to your own bones or something. It's probably a dangerous fantasy, but I think that's what gets exciting to me, is the sort of danger of it.
Got it. Yeah. I think like as you're talking, I think the answer to my own question seems to be that maybe we need to break through the fantasy people have, that some way they can coast through this crisis by being an NPC, or like maybe if you break through that fantasy, like they realize that there's no option but to act, then maybe that can force them to act. So maybe that's an angle to explore there.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think it can be fluid. Like there's a time to be that. One doesn't always have to be the player character or the main character.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Andrew, you had a question.
Yes, Rob, I think if you can see the question I put down in the chat. Of course, I'm taking it to sex and substance use.
Mm-hmm.
because of my own interests in creative process and research. And I'm interested in the how you kind of talk about the NPC, especially in relationship to anonymity and fantasy, and what I kind of am translating kind of places like a bathhouse to a gaming environment. Just what would your take be on what you're talking about in relationship to those settings?
Don't be a non-player character in bed. No, I don't
Yeah,
know.
so the non-player could be the anonymous figure who's standing in the corner.
Yeah,
Let's take it away from a bed.
yeah. I mean, that feels like a question for you to answer, and a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. It relates to some of your work. I mean, I think all of the thoughts about machine vitality kind of relate to some of the work you've done with electronic music and sex. So, and of course the substances are all technologies as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know exactly where to take it on the spot. I'm
I,
curious to hear
yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I kind of wanted to put you on the spot a little bit. Of course, I'm responding to what you're talking about through the lens of what my interests are.
Yeah, I love the suggestion of that direction.
Yeah, and I think that the especially when you're talking about internalized shame as a kind of a pointer, and then be fun, and the way that for instance, pornography influences people's actions and behaviors, and kind of posturing actually,
Yeah.
where you don't even know if that's the real person, or is it a pornographic posturing on the part of that person.
Yeah. It's you know, that some of that section in the writing that I didn't uh actually read today around it was around narcissism and internalized shame, and it was Jesse's art, Low Lonely. I see Jesse's here. I don't know if he's able to talk or not, but this kind of swinging between internalized shame and the narcissism that's necessary to function as an artist was something that kind of came out of a lot of the work that he does. I really recommend Jesse's work, Low Lonely. He dissects this type of subject matter, this problem of posturing in a way that I don't see anywhere else, except maybe some meme pages, but he does it with great humor and
I love that
very
kind of
deftly.
section of the intersection of narcissism and internalized shame and anonymity kind of coming together within those kind of situations. Uh, anyway, I just wanted to put that out there and see where things go.
Yeah, there's definitely like some kind of maybe healthy pendulum between just like the feeling yourself and not, and that I think is related to what you're talking about, and also what's required to function as an artist now.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Bob. The text piece is amazing, and the longer text piece that you sent me is so engaging. I'm just I feel privileged being able to collaborate with you and work with you and just engage with your thinking.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Nathan, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So my question was in regards to the NPC role and its, you know, in the large use of LLMs now, and how you see that would apply and affect it, sort of like dropping out but masking it with an AI later. So you know, that decision to become an NPC in whatever capacity.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
layering it with that LLM.
that's cool. I'm all for it if it works for you to drop out and mask it with an LLM. Like, yeah, I mean, LLMs are definitely a big part of this, and the whole end of the presentation is, and a lot of the problem too is just like this suggestion, like this. There was a phrase that Kedra Mensah used in their work on NPCs, which was the feeling of obsolescence. And I think that was also like something a lot of people were feeling, and something that's kind of a fear and a feeling for a lot of people working in the arts. And it's also, happening in certain ways. And that's, one of the conditions of the current state of things, metacrisis, that we have to work through. And another reason why I'm trying to find this machine vitality, and why I used ChatGPT a lot, but not in the ways that are expected. And so that's where I'm trying to like break it a bit. And, I used ChatGPT to generate words, prompted it to create these diagrams and whatnot. And that's where that stuff gets exciting to me. And also it's cool because the slides that I showed today are really of the past week, and likely it will just get better, and we won't be able to get stuff that veers to gist in the same way. And I found those slides, I don't know if people were looking closely at them all, but able to communicate just as well as if they were actually done in detail. They kind of give you this like overall gist that actually articulates, but it's more generative, rather than looking at them and trying to find like the mistake or what's wrong with the 2x2 matrix. It feels almost more collaborative with the AI. So rather than, I guess where I'm going with that is, rather than dropping out and having an AI replace you in your role in the world, or having, some kind of bot do that, it's way more exciting to do something completely new. And this is my big critique of AI in general, is that it's just creating it in our own image, and these kind of, natural language models is just a boring objective, and we should be more focused on other potential, what it can do, other intelligences than human.
Awesome, thanks. I don't have a follow-up. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Vlad, you had a question.
Oh, you're muted, Vlad.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That was awesome, Rob. That was like very thought-provoking and like a poetry slam, and also very witty and funny. And so I really enjoyed all of that very, very much. When you mentioned archetypes, I think of obviously Carl Jung, and then I also think about, as a brand strategist, brands as well. And the direct or the closest relation that I think of in the current like 12 main archetypes is the everyman, whose like motto is to like all men and women are kind of created equal, and their main desire is to really kind of connect with others, with similar brands being like IKEA, Target, Gap, Wrangler, maybe, etc. And so I was wondering like what kind of connection or relation you have in terms of like the everyman, if it's like a evolution of it in our modern day world, and could it be a replacement, or is it just something a little bit that's kind of dialed a little bit longer down the line? And are there any existing brands that kind of fit the NPC model or archetype?
That's a great question. Yeah, the everyman is a posture in itself, and I think it's really cool bringing up brands, because the world of branding is this one place where we just talk openly about these postures, and business people have no problem understanding the idea and just talking outright explicitly about, we have a set of values here, and a code and a personality and a mood board, and we need to execute it to create this perception in people's minds. And as people, it's much more taboo, and like the magic is totally like just diminishes or disappears as soon as you start to examine it closely with people, or it tends to be upsetting, or everyone can talk about it when it's not about themselves. And so that aspect of it is interesting to me. Yeah, NPC and everyman's yeah, a fair comparison or tie as well. I don't know. I'm
There was
open
like
to
there's a little bit
NPC brand.
more. There was like a little bit more to it. There was some like jovialness. The NPC wasn't like their frontal lobe wasn't sort of like completely disconnected. There was something a little bit more of like a even like an element of trickster
Mm,
uh, attached to it. There was like an underlying sort of joke um, within it. Yeah, interesting, very interesting take. But I was
yeah. Did anyone put in the chat what a good NPC brand is? No.
Just on that thought, I think that how I differentiate the everyman and the NPC is the NPC is like hollow. Like I don't think like I think once you start to attach characteristics or any sort of trait to the NPC, it kills it. It's dead. Um,
okay.
so
Like,
and that
and by being hollow, it sort of like absorbs wherever the hollow man goes. It absorbs whatever the dynamics are, or like the basic dynamics of whatever that model might be or expresses. In a sense, is that what you mean by that?
I can see it in that way, but I think of an NPC more as this entity that's just always around the corner, that's always in the room,
Oh,
elephant in the room, the just this thing that's there that
you're talking about Alexa. I'm just kidding.
exactly maybe Alexa, maybe Siri, maybe those are the
Yeah.
NPCs.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I like that take as well. Yeah, the everyman feels a little bit more like a salt of the earth, like it's necessarily real and full and hefty in a way that the NPC is superficial.
And
Mm.
so we'll have one more share, and then we're here for 90 minutes in total, so maybe we'll drift to the more open inquiry. But Hema, I believe you had a share.
Hi, Rob. Thanks
Hey,
for that. That was great. So much to think about. I mean, just kind of building on what Vlad was saying, it made me think about if the NPC or if there's overlap between the NPC and sort of the idea of being basic and like the claiming of being basic. I think Kedra, you sort of created the distinction of like it them being more of like this side character. Um, but I think there is something interesting about that, the claiming of the mid, and then in the claiming of it, does it become its own main character almost because it becomes a character. So if you're like on the side, it's like you don't want to be seen, but then if you choose to be seen by naming yourself, then are you repositioned in some way? And I don't know if, yeah, those were some of the thoughts that were coming up for me. And is it a more complex version of being basic or an evolution, or did gestures come with being basic? This idea of being basic and, the things that people wore, the things that people held and that they drank. And there was like a whole world around this, then idea of being basic.
yeah, when you say that, there's something to me of when you sort of just self-identify as basic, if I'm just basic, it actually there's a liberating thing there too, where it like frees you to cultivate your own taste, I think. Whereas if you're sophisticated, it is like determined at least the direction of where your taste needs to go. And so that's like it's like you could you could say I have bad taste, or I could say you're have no taste, like you're just um, directed towards a particular idea of what it is to have taste. But I like that about, yeah, basic. Yeah, these little things that like we find out what actually happens when you call yourself basic or
Yeah.
NPC, and how
Yeah.
it changes how you see things and what pressures are relieved.
Yeah, and it's like getting in front of something, or like, yeah, I think it's like, yeah, it's really interesting.
So I see Jeremy has a question, but perhaps we can hold off because we're at the top of the hour. And we'll jump into quick breakout rooms right now, like a 5-minute breakout room. So if you feel called to slip out now, or if you don't want to participate in the second part, feel free to quietly slip out and give some thanks or gratitude in the chat. But we'll be jumping into 5 minutes breakout room with Paulo Stone. And then the question is, what stood out most for you in today's presentation, or what your perspective is on the NPC? And you can just kind of take turns sharing that. And Rob, maybe you can stay in the main room with me.